Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two. We'll just give everyone a couple more moments to get settled in after lunch. So one moment. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started now just because we do have a busy content-packed hour for yourselves. So in a moment, I'll explain who I am and who is joining the webinar today. But first off, thank you all for joining. I know that it's definitely a busy season for everyone, and we're really looking forward to diving into this topic of how yourselves can streamline or begin the way that you run construction opportunities in Bonfire, as well as dive into eBonding and hearing from an expert on that topic. So to continue, you can see that myself, Rachel Friesen, who is probably connected with many of you, I'll be facilitating and running the webinar today on behalf of Bonfire's customer success team. I'm joined as well by Brendan Knowles. Brendan is one of our most tenured customer success managers at Bonfire. He's really an expert when it comes to working with organizations and helping them streamline the way that they run their processes offline into the Bonfire tool itself, and he's worked with over 100 organizations from academia to commercial to transit org. So he'll be definitely a wonderful asset and a voice to this webinar soon as we dive into the tool itself. I'm also joined by Steve. So Steve has over 25 years of experience working with surety bonds in the surety bond industry. Steve created mobile bonds in 2012 to help people do the bond business better in Canada and the US. And for those of you who have been with Bonfire for some time, we worked previously with Steve on running this webinar, similar webinar, I should say, about 2 years ago. And he's a beyond expert in the mobile bonding space, or e-bonding space, I should say. And you'll be hearing from him for the majority of today to really understand what he's seen and the advice that he has for yourselves who are curious about evolving your process into e-bonding. So I'm really grateful to be joined by the two of them. I'm definitely monopolizing the intro at the moment, but you'll hear from them both right away. So the flow of today and the agenda really is relative to what we've heard from yourselves over the last few months, especially because of the changes due to that COVID has catalyzed to your process, essentially, or what your process has to become. And what I mean by that is many of organizations that we worked with for some times, your public works or your construction teams still ran offline, paper-based opportunities, that kind of thing. But due to the nature of events, you've had to really move at light speed to change the way you're facilitating that part of your process. So this was a long overdue topic for us over the last couple months, and it will be tactical and granular because of that, because we know that's the nature of the times. We need to pack a punch with every interaction we have. So the first part of today's webinar, we'll really be diving into the Bonfire system itself, and Brendan will go through some best practices that we've seen, fully acknowledging that yourselves are all the best representation of your own internal processes and you understand the limitations of your org best. So he'll really be acknowledging that, but also going into some generalities of what we would recommend and what we've seen. And for the second half of the webinar, we will be diving into or giving Steve the mic really and having him walk through his best practices for e-bonding relative to his experience running and starting up mobile bonds. I do have designated Q&A as the third and final part of the webinar, but I would really encourage yourselves to ask questions throughout, because this is the design of this, is that it will be interactive. So what I mean by that is, if I see a question come in and I think it should be posed to Steve on the spot because it's topical and can't wait till the end, then I will definitely be posing that to him at the time. In addition, if yourselves have questions you'd like to pose to the group and have me vocalize that so you can free form your answers in through the chat, please let me know, or please write that in. So we want to make this interactive, and you'll see how I'll be proving that in a moment with a poll that I run and additional polls that we'll be running throughout. In addition, this slide deck will be available after, as well as a recording of the webinar will be sent to all of yourselves, as well as those who registered but were not able to attend. On that note, to kind of get a lay of the land of who's attending today, I will be running a poll right away just to have an idea of how you're running your construction opportunities at the moment. So I'm just launching that poll now. We'll give everyone a couple moments to answer. I'm sure many of you would hope you could just lean back after lunch and not have to move much, but I'm going to be that two-way street kind of facilitator at this time. So I'll keep it open for about 5 more seconds and then we'll close the poll, but we're still having a few answers come in. Okay. Perfect. I'm going to close that now. So I'll share the results. So as you can see, it looks like the majority of yourselves are managing all your bids electronically. A small percentage of you are utilizing electronic opportunities and eBonds. And then we can see that close second is some bids electronically, maybe threshold dependent. And then about a fifth of you as well aren't managing your bids electronically. So we have a good mixed bag today as far as attendees go. And the hope is that yourselves realize you're in good company as well. Okay, on that note, just on the good company note, before I pass it over to Brendan for the demo, maybe some of yourselves who have logos here just answered the poll as it is. I know some of you are in attendance, but I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge that you're in good company. Even, for example, what the best practices Brendan will be speaking to are representative by some of what we've seen the organizations in front of you do well in the way that they facilitate their opportunities in Bonfire. So this is just an acknowledgement of whether you're in the US or Canada. I only put so many logos on this slide, but there has been many of yourselves kind of spearheading the way for some time running construction opportunities. And if anything, there's going to be a larger mass just due to the nature of COVID, changing the way yourselves are running your opportunities. On that note, I will pass it off to Brendan, and be empathetic at the end of the day. We're all remote, so it'll take me one moment just to share and make Brendan the presenter. But without further ado, Brendan, you have the keys now, and you'll be able to dive in and share your screen.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Rach. Just gonna make sure I can get set up here with sharing my screen. Just bear with me here. Sorry, Rach, I'm actually having a bit of trouble being able to share my screen. Just bear with me, the option is available there.
Okay.
Let's just try passing presentership back and then back over to me to see if that.
Okay. I think, Brendan, it's still waiting to, okay, I'm going to show my screen again, and then I'm just changing the presenter back to you. One moment. Okay. And there you go. Do you see the prompt?
Perfect. Yep, I do now. Okay, so I just want to make sure my screen is sharing. We should see project demo type open tender. Is that passing through? Sorry, Rachel, I just want to confirm my screen is sharing accurately.
I don't think, sorry, Brendan.
That's okay.
I think we can, it says we can see your screen, but I'm not sure everyone can see it. Not yet, no.
Okay. Let's see if I can pause and then share again. Is that better?
Actually, you know what? I think it's my fault. I think I messed up with the poll. We're going to
That's
hide the results, and now you should be able to see it. Everyone can see your screen. Yes, I was
awesome.
the problem.
That's not a problem at all, Rach. Power of technology gets away from us. But thanks again, everyone, for joining us. My name is Brendan, and like Rachel mentioned, I'm a client success manager here at Bonfire, and I work with a number of clients across all sorts of verticals, from academia to municipalities to transportation, special districts, and commercial. In today's demonstration, we're going to cover two different demo projects that I built out in Bonfire. And my intent here is to walk through best practices from the perspective of the project owner, the vendor as they're making their submission to the tender in Bonfire, and the evaluator who's quote unquote scoring or evaluating the proposals we've received. So the first type of tender I want to walk through the tender process is an open tender process. And this is arguably the most popular tender process across the board. Really, this is the sort of tender that's open to the broader contracting or contractor market for anyone who feels that they can meet the requirements and can provide the lowest cost. So in this example, we're going to be walking through a asphalt paving and shouldering request for tender, but by no means do you have to limit it to that type of project. It could really be any tender that fits the open tender process. So I'm going to move back over to my demo environment here. And what we're going to see here is a Bonfire project from the perspective of the project owner to begin. So I'm going to lean a little bit on the experience that those in the webinar may have using Bonfire from this perspective, but certainly if anything isn't coming through clear or you want a refresher or clarification, I encourage you to reach out to your client success manager for more information. But we're going to dive through everything here, and the process I'm going to cover is a bit condensed just because we do have a lot of information to cover. But some of the key elements I want to highlight in this project: this is an open tender and it's a request for tender. Now it's open to the public and it is publicly visible.
Brendan, I think we're still looking at your PowerPoint.
Okay, let's see if I can fix that. Okay, how's that?
There, that's perfect.
Perfect. Sorry about that, guys. So again, just highlighting here that this is an open and public request for tender. Now, some of the elements may be familiar. So the project's timeline is visible here, and you can see we're currently in the open stage. Now, one of the elements I want to highlight is that I've actually added a custom event. So this is one of those best practices we're talking about. In any project, whether it's a tender or any other procurement process, you're able to utilize customized events in addition to the default events like the project's open and close date to identify unique events. So in this case, I have a mandatory site visit that's been set up for May 20th at 11 a.m. So these custom events that we've set up are really just there for visibility only, and they're there to acknowledge and cover our bases in terms of communicating the expectations with vendors. And I've complemented that with a public notice. So I posted a public notice to indicate to my vendors that there will be a mandatory site visit on May 20th at 11 a.m. and that failure to attend the site visit could be grounds for elimination from further consideration for awarding. So we have two elements here. I'm posting a public notice to push the notification out, and I'm keeping visibility with respect to that event on the project's timeline using a custom event. Some other elements to highlight: I'm sharing the project's RFT documentation as a public file so that the vendors can download it directly from Bonfire. And scrolling down here, I'm not going to cover a whole lot of the information here just because it's either not relevant or just for the sake of time, but I want to open up the evaluation group section and highlight that in this tender, I've really had a pretty simple breakout for evaluation stages. And the first evaluation group is really just designed to collect all of the mandatory documents. So things like the form of tender, the electronic bid bond documentation, the consent of surety, and the current proof of insurance documentation. And then we're using quick pass-fail criteria to acknowledge that the electronic bid bond has been authenticated using mobile bonds, and that's something Steve's going to talk about in a few minutes. The consent of surety has been validated, the proof of insurance is up to date, and then we're also having a pass-fail to confirm that the vendor has attended that mandatory site visit. So the idea is we release this first evaluation group once the project or the tender has closed, We go through our pass-fails across all of the vendors who have submitted. If any vendors have not complied with these pass-fail criteria, we eliminate them from further consideration, and that further consideration takes place in evaluation group 2 for the tender price. And really, when it comes to tenders, most of the time we're talking about a price-driven bid. The lowest cost wins. So what I've done is I've mapped our electronic bid bond, and I've also created a requested data slot that's asking for a numeric value from the vendors so that I can really quickly just input what their base bid price is. This is another one of those best practices. So because I'm using a numeric data slot, I can actually set the project up so that the pricing component gets automatically scored. And the way that we do that is we map this requested data slot to a pricing criterion. So in this case, you can see I have a pricing criterion set up to collect the base bid price, and I've weighted it the full 100 points, because again, that's the only component we really care about. So because we're using this automatic scoring, Bonfire will rank order all of the prices or the base bid amounts that we've received from each of the vendors from the highest price to the lowest price, and then we'll attribute the most points out of 100 or 100 out of 100 points to the lowest cost, the lowest available points to the highest cost, and points distributed to all of the other costs based on where they are in that rank ordering. So that's one approach. Now, I've also created a pass-fail criteria for the base bid price as an alternative way of evaluating that price component, because again, we know that the lowest price is going to be the winner for the bid. And so maybe we don't want to assign a weighting to the evaluation. We just want to have a quick pass fail. Either you're the lowest cost, in which case you pass, and if you're not, then you fail. Some of the other elements, again, are actually really what I just want to highlight before we move on to the perspective of a vendor, is that we have 2 submissions already in place. And so we're going to take place of a third vendor's making their submissions. So I'm going to pop on over to, I think it's this one. Perfect. So I'm now taking the seat of a vendor or a contractor who's interested in submitting a bid to this particular tender. So this is what that submission page would look like. And it really does not deviate from the submission page that a vendor might experience when they're submitting to any other type of project in Bonfire. Some of the key elements that we have insight to from the vendor's perspective are the project's details. So things like the name of the project, the reference number, the type, its status, the date it was opened, the date by which intent to bid acknowledgements or declarations are due, the date by which I have to submit my questions, and in this case, I've set it to never, meaning I have the ability as a vendor to submit my questions at any point in time, and then the close date is set for June 30th. So I can see how many days I have left, the project description, and then just highlighting again that custom event best practice, we can see in the list of important events is that mandatory site visit with all of the relevant information like the location, the description, and then again, the time frame. So it looks like May 20th from 11 to 1 p.m. is the time frame there. Now moving down, what I have insight to are the pieces of requested information. So we can see that as the project owner has built it out, we're breaking it out into bonding, insurance, and other mandatory documentation, and then tender pricing. So this is what the vendor is going to be expected to submit. Now, if I wanted to, I could use the opportunity Q&A functionality to submit a question to the project owner if that were relevant. And most importantly, when I'm ready to create my submission, I'm going to provide my intent to bid. And this is important because as vendors provide their intent to bid, we capture that and date stamp it so that we can produce that as a report after the project has concluded. So I've gone ahead and I've provided my intent to bid. I have to log in here. Oh, just bear with me, guys.
While you're logging in too, I will pose a question that came in. We had an organization ask or mention that they typically hold mandatory site walks or pre-bid meetings during the solicitation, not ahead of advertising, as the example is in this demo. So this is not to you, Brendan, but more to the group. People are welcome to write in if that's their best practice, or they do site visits during the actual timeline of the opportunity itself, and I'll share those answers later. Sorry, back to you, Brendan.
Perfect, thanks, Rach, no problem. So the idea here, again, from the perspective of the vendor is we've grouped up the documentation we're asking them to submit to us by these high-level categories. So essentially the mandatory documentation and then the pricing information. So the form of tender, consent to surety, these are all requested document slots, very easy to upload. So I'm gonna click upload file, and Bonfire is simply gonna ask me where what kind of document I want to submit. So in this case, we're just uploading documents as needed. Agreement to bond. And as a vendor, I have the peace of mind that my submission documents are being accepted as required because that red check cell is shifting to green. Now, let's say that I were uploading a file that wasn't compliant with, say, the type. In this case, we're accepting any type for the proof of insurance, but maybe this was an Excel or a PDF type, and we were trying to upload an Excel document. That red check cell would not shift to green, indicating that we are ready to go ahead, and it would provide an error message indicating what is required in order to satisfy the requirements for that particular requested document slot. So we're not going to talk too much about the electronic bid bond at this stage. Steve's going to touch more on that, but functionally speaking, when we talk about electronic bid bonds or eBonding in Bonfire, this is treated no different than any other type of document. It is fundamentally a PDF. Now, the big hesitation that comes around from my experience is the authentication of that electronic bid bond, because obviously it's being generated in a digital environment as opposed to in a physical environment. And so mobile bonds as technology is designed to provide the compliance and assurance, which again, Steve will talk about in a few minutes here. Lastly, I want to touch on the bid price. So again, there's that requested data slot for bid price. And let's just say I'm going to enter in my total cost bid prices, just arbitrarily 130,000. I'll click save. And once I'm green across the board, I can finalize and submit. Perfect. Now, as a vendor, I'm not left in the wake. I have lots of assurances. So I've got a confirmation code. I can download all of my files. I can see all of the information I've submitted here. And then I can also go back and unsubmit my submission if I wanted to adjust a component of my proposal for that bid, obviously before the project's close date and time. So the last thing I want to show for this first demo project is the perspective of an evaluator. So we're going to go ahead and shift this project schedule manually just by pushing the dates back here so that I can go from the open stage into the evaluation stage.
Brendan, a question that came in was why you chose a data slot. Do you want to quickly mention as to why you chose that method?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually very timely for this stage of the demo. So a requested data slot provides us with the ability to collect pricing information, but not just exclusively pricing information. For the sake of this example, now the reason I chose a requested data slot with the number type is, again, because we can actually map that to a pricing criterion. So what we can see here is that pricing criterion for the base bid price, again weighted at 100 points, is set up to be auto-scored by incorporating whatever gets submitted into that base bid price slot. So the reason that we use that requested data slot as in terms of best practices is for the auto-scoring functionality in combination with the pricing criterion. Okay, so just taking it back to the demo here, I am looking at this project both from the perspective of a project owner, but for the sake of this portion of the demo, we're looking at it from the perspective of an evaluator. So thinking about those two evaluation groups, beginning with the mandatory evaluation, I'm going to release that so that we can run through that initial stage of the evaluation. And then our evaluators will walk in, whoever's mapped to run through that initial evaluation. And for each of our vendors, ABZ Tech, Hendrickson Brothers, and IWB companies, they'll open the scorecard, and we can see that we have access to those pass-fail criteria that we've set up. So the idea here is we're accessing the documents that have been submitted by each of the proponents, either viewing them in Bonfire's in-platform document viewer, accessing the scorecard when we're ready, and then making sure that we can apply a pass or a fail based on the requirements. So I'm just going to fly through applying some passes here to this particular proponent, because what I really want to highlight here again is that reason for the numeric data slot along with that auto scoring functionality. So again, we can always have the scoring of the pricing criteria be a manual process, but in this case, Bonfire streamlines the process and the evaluation component by allowing you to create that auto scoring. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to automatically release the tender price evaluation group, which again contains the base bid price numeric slot as well as that pricing criterion. And when I release that, because we have auto scoring set up, Bonfire is going to automatically apply those scores so that I don't have to worry about any potential human error in typing in the wrong number or missing a digit in the base prices that have been submitted. And just to highlight that piece here, if I were to head over to the scoring summary, what we see is that for the pricing component, base bid price, those scores have been applied automatically. We know that Hendricks and Brothers has the lowest price because they're 54,650, whereas the rest are higher. And then points are attributed to the other scores across the board. So that's one approach. Now, certainly if we didn't want to mandate the requirement for using a weighted approach across the pricing evaluation, and we just wanted to apply a pass or a fail, we could do so as well. So I think I just need to map myself as an evaluator to group 2. So just to highlight the manual scoring of a pricing component in a tender as opposed to that auto scoring process. Again, we would head over to the submission section, open up the scorecards for each of the vendors, and what we'll see here is for the pass fail on that base bid price, I'm just going to go ahead and say I know ADZ Tech has the lowest price. I'm going to go ahead and select pass. I'm going to select other, and lowest bid amount is the reason. So lots of flexibility here in how we're structuring the use case in Bonfire to meet your subjective needs. So I think I have to cancel my share for a second, pop on over to the slideshow, click show, perfect, okay. So just to highlight some of the elements when it comes to open tenders in Bonfire, really open tenders are used for construction tenders which seek proposals from the broad and open market. There's really no consideration around pre-qualified vendors or maybe specialized contractors. And most often this is a situation where the lowest cost bid wins. So some examples pertain to infrastructure upgrades, things like asphalt paving and shouldering, new building construction, building upgrades, renovations, that sort of thing. And some of the tips here again are using a numeric requested data slot to automate the collection and lowest cost evaluation of your total bid amounts from each of your vendors. Okay, so thinking about the other end of the spectrum when it comes to tendering processes, there's a whole bunch of different types, but this type, a two-stage tendering process, is something that gets leveraged in more bespoke or complex construction projects or tenders where early contractor engagement will provide long-term value over the lifetime of the project. So we're going to hop back on over, stop sharing my screen, reshare.
I'm going to jump in for a second, Brendan.
Sure.
Just to loop back on the question I posed to the group earlier, thank you all for providing your responses as to when you hold site visits or walkthroughs. I would say 90%, don't quote my percentage there, but about 90% said that they hold the site or visit walkthrough during, so after the posting of the opportunity. Range of reasons, potentially vendors maybe saying that they weren't notified in time to avoid any issues with perceived advantage. But we did have a few organizations that mentioned that they do have the site visit and the walkthrough ahead of the opportunity. So take that as you will, but there's a range of feedback on that point. Back to you, Brendan.
Thanks very much, Rach. And actually, a good point to make here. So as we can see in this second demo project for that two-stage tendering process, we're looking at the construction of a college athletics facility. Now, I also have a custom event for that mandatory site visit, but let's just walk through really quickly how I can adjust the timelines there. So let's say that this site visit was taking place after the project had opened. I'm going to click Actions and Manage New Events, and this is going to give me the flexibility to adjust some of the elements of that custom event. So this is the user interface that we're seeing whenever we want to add a new custom event. And we can see that mandatory site visit currently has passed, obviously, because that's in the past, but let's say that we want to push this to a date in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that custom event. We're just going to go and push this to, say, June 4th, just arbitrarily setting that there. And then we know that this is going to end at 1 p.m. Perfect. Some of the other elements you can include in your mandatory or your custom events include the name, the location, the description. Now, importantly, we can indicate whether this event is mandatory, and then we can also indicate whether this is an event that should be publicly visible, meaning internal and external or vendor users can see it, or internal, meaning this is designed for internal view only. Vendors would not be able to see that particular event on the project's timeline. So I'm going to publish that with the new date of June 4th. And when I go back to the project, we're going to see that that gets reflected both in the project's timeline as well as in the project's important events. So just letting that component load there, we can see that that mandatory event is now taking place at a date after the project has opened on June 4th. And if I open up the details, we can see that that is also reflected here. So it's upcoming, that site visit, all the information remains the same. So a lot of this project is constructed similarly to the last project that we saw, but when it comes to a two-stage tendering process, we typically have some additional information that we're going to ask those vendors we're opening the opportunity up from the outset, and we're going to cover what that looks like in a moment. Now, one of the ways that you can leverage Bonfire for perhaps more bespoke or complex tendering process is through the use of what are called bid tables. And we've actually just released a new feature called inline vendor submissions, which I'm going to demonstrate in a few minutes here. But effectively, a bid table allows us to aggregate a whole, a number of items that we're asking vendors to bid on. So in a tendering process, that could be things like the pre-construction, general pre-construction fees and preliminaries. In other opportunities, it could be things like catalog bidding or commodity good bidding. So in this case, we're not going to look at the actual bid table from the project perspective of the project owner, just because that is a little bit intensive, and I want to keep my my eye on the clock here. Some of the other elements again. So from the evaluation group section, we can see again 2 evaluation groups, one for the mandatory evaluation and one for the tender price evaluation, and then we have some of those elements of requested information being collected. So if I just walk through those requested information, it's a little bit more extensive here. So we're going to be asking for the proposed site and head office staff's CVs, looking for a schedule of rates applicable to stage 2, looking for a pre-construction program, because again, a 2-stage tender process is typically designed to incorporate input from the, let's say, preferred vendor in stage 1 when it comes to the development of the design and the construction methodology. The idea here is we're really optimizing the design and the cost and buildability of these opportunities. And then some of those other standard elements like the form of tender, consent of surety, current proof of insurance. Now, again, that bid table is coming into play here because we're going to collect some of those stage 1 fees in a stage 1 fee schedule. And then, of course, again, that electronic bid bond piece. Looking at the criteria, again, I have those 2 different ways of evaluating the bid price. Electronic bid bond has been validated, consent to surety has been validated, proof of insurance is up to date, and then 1 for that bid table. So just like the last project, we have 2 vendors who have already submitted. And just to highlight here, this is where we can see that intent to bid in the timestamp. So I can see for each of these different vendors or these suppliers, we can see that they have indicated that they provided an intent to bid with that declaration date. Now, if a vendor had opted to say no to the intent to bid, maybe they aren't available to provide the services at the time required, they'll indicate no, and they're going to be required to provide a reason as well. So that is just kept in place for ongoing auditability. But without further ado, I want to move over to the perspective of a vendor who's making a submission to this project. So where are we here? Okay, so again, this is the perspective of a vendor now, and I've actually taken some liberties in just kind of uploading the relevant documents to the relevant slots so that we don't have to sit through that. And what I want to walk through is the collection of the bid price information as using the bid table with that inline vendor submission experience. So again, we can see this is the stage 1 fee schedule, and we're asking the vendors to input all stage 1 or pre-construction fees and preliminaries that might be involved in that first stage. We can see that those costs are currently being broken out by 2 baskets. So one is the initial pre-construction fees and one are those preliminaries. All I'm being asked as a vendor is to input my cost or fee amount for each of these line items. So general pre-construction fee, maybe this is, $19,500. Demolition and site clearance fees, maybe this is going to be $26,000.
And while you're doing that, Brendan, I will mention many of you are probably, and you can keep putting in quotes, many of you are probably wondering what you're looking at. Like it probably looks a little bit unique. This is sort of a new launch to the tool of inline quoting for the vendors as opposed to them downloading a Excel document to re-upload for the bid table quote. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm going to be giving you another quick teaser after Brendan's demo, but this is a new update to the system to sort of streamline the vendor experience for tenders.
Exactly, yeah. So one of the things that I'm trying to highlight here is that this cell or this field here for cost fee amount is designed to accept a currency value only. So if for some reason a vendor thought that it was more appropriate to type out the amount, Bonfire won't allow that, and it'll default to $0. So we'll go ahead and we'll apply those amounts. And once I've inserted all my amounts, I'm going to click Confirm Bid Table. And just like my experience when I'm submitting information for those requested documents, I'm going to wait till I get that green check cell. We're good to go. And again, I'm going to finalize and submit my proposal. Perfect. So jumping back to the perspective of a project owner, the idea with a two-stage tender is that you have the initial stage where you're going to work with a preferred vendor in a pre-contract scenario where they're going to provide you with preliminary costs and will help you tailor and develop the design and construction methodology. Once that first stage has concluded and you're ready to move on to the second stage, the vendor is then going to be expected either to provide a fixed rate or a fixed price for the rest of the construction project, or you may opt to open up the opportunity to the original vendors who'd all submitted for a second stage of proposal collection and evaluation. So very similarly here, again, I'm just going to manually push this project over into the evaluation stage to walk through another best practice, which is using our reopen feature designed to facilitate something like reopening a project into a second stage of collecting information for further evaluation. Take that schedule. Perfect. So just like we would have in the past, we're going to walk through the evaluation process by by viewing the relevant documentation and then opening up the scorecard. Now, I'm going to take a bit of an expedited stance here. I realize I have to release these evaluation groups to begin. One of the powerful elements of using a bid table in Bonfire to collect pricing information is that it gives you a really comprehensive order list view of all of the vendors' bid information for across of those line items in a single side-by-side environment. And so I want to highlight what that looks like really quickly here. So I'm going to go again to the submission section. We're going to click scorecard. And what I'm going to do is open up that order list. Again, the order list shows us all of the vendors' bid information across the board. And what we're going to see on this next screen is perhaps a little bit complex in nature, but again, once you have some of the understanding under your belt, it's really easy to work with, and we will be pushing out new functionality, which makes this view also streamlined and optimized as well. But again, what we're seeing here are those two baskets for initial pre-construction fees and preliminaries, and then the three items that are contained within each. Each one of these subsequent columns represents one of the three vendors, so ABZ Tech, Hendricks & Brothers, and IWB companies. Now in the corresponding cell, we can see the amounts that they've submitted for, in this case, the total bid amount. So I can see that ABZ Tech is 18,500, Hendricks & Brothers is 17,000, and IWB companies is 19,500. Now, if it were important, I could say I think that Hendricks & Brothers has the best general pre-construction fee, and I think that ABZ Tech has the best demolition and site clearance fees by making these selections. However, within the bid table, I can have Bonfire automatically select these for me. So just by using the auto select functionality, setting my value to lowest and indicating that I want to work with, say, one vendor, we're going to go ahead and Bonfire is going to make the selection. So Bonfire automatically knows that of the three vendors, Hendricks & Brothers has the best cumulative price. And just visually, we know that that's the case because there's this green heat map where the darkest shaded cell across any line item shows the lowest cost and the lightest shaded cell shows the highest cost. So a lot of functionality that can be leveraged from the bid table here in terms of being able to easily evaluate and tabulate the bid information that we've received from vendors. But let's just say Hendricks & Brothers is the one we want to go with. So I'm going to give that award to them, head back to the project. And just because I know I'm working with Hendricks & Brothers and I don't really want to work with anyone else in that second stage, I'm going to just eliminate the other two vendors in the project from consideration. And the idea here is by eliminating them, I'm ensuring that they're not requested to submit additional information when I reopen this project for a second stage of collecting information. Perfect. So we can see here Hendricks & Brothers is the only vendor we've opted to move forward. Let's say we've reached the end of the first stage and we're ready to reopen the project. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click. Okay. Bear with me, guys. I realize that I have to enable one setting on my portal here. This is always the best part of the job.
That's okay. And I was going to mention there's a range of questions coming in that are really helpful and semi-specific. So what I just wanted to reiterate that at the end of the day, if anything, cannot be addressed in the questions, we will be letting your customer success managers know, and they'll be following up this week or Monday at the latest, just so you know it's not falling on deaf ears. I would love to support everyone in answering your questions that come in.
Yeah, perfect, Rach. So I'm actually having a bit of trouble getting that set up. Suffice to say, the reopen feature is something that you can leverage, and functionally what it allows you to do is to reopen this project for a second open phase, during which you would be asking this particular vendor, maybe Hendrickson Brothers, who is the preferred vendor for the rest of the project, to provide some information like, additional project information. Slipping my mind at the moment here. You might be asking for a confirmation of a fixed rate for the rest of the project, information like contract conditions, essentially anything that's required for that second stage in the project. But guys, really that covers the demonstration piece here. So just to cap off my component of today's conversation, I'm going to bring it back to the slide deck here. And again, just highlighting some of the elements here. Two-stage tendering processes are really used for larger, more complex tendering, or when you have a preferred contractor whose input is going to be influential when it comes to the final design and methodology for construction. So examples really to consider this in our large-scale facility construction projects, or even campus-wide construction projects, those complex infrastructure upgrades that require consideration of maybe multiple package contracts for different elements of the process. And again, utilizing that reopen feature to maintain a central audit trail across all of the stages of the tender in the project, as opposed to breaking it out and really having a patchwork approach.
Okay, great. So sorry to cut you off, Brendan. On that note, we're going to transition right away to Steve. So I'm going to run a poll very quickly, and I'll actually close it this time in a moment. I've learned from my mistakes. So in a moment, Steve, I'm going to give you the keys to share the screen. This will just allow ourselves, yourselves, and Steve just to understand sort of what your organization's bond process is to date. Doesn't mean where you want to go, it means your current state. At the end of the day, those are kind of conflicting sometimes, I'm aware. I will close the poll in one moment just to give Steve some time. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So this is where everyone's sitting. We only accept, actually, that's interesting. It's about 50-50 for we only accept physical sealed bonds, and we accept PDF copies of paper bonds electronically. And then again, a small percentage of you, probably reflective, similar to the first poll, are already utilizing eBonds. So it's great to see. I'm going to hide the results, and Steve, in a moment, you should get a notification where you'll be able to share your screen. Perfect. Great, Steve.
Perfect. Okay. I was a little bit nervous there, I gotta tell you. Thank you, Rachel and Brendan, for having me come back to talk to your customers about eBonding. Certainly, there's a lot has changed since we last did a webinar a couple of years ago. Certainly, just not before the pandemic. I mean, things were really kind of taking off as people were moving to electronic procurement platforms like Bonfire. But certainly, the pandemic has certainly accelerated the use of the e-bonds quite dramatically, and I think it'll take hold and keep growing as well. So I guess just to start, maybe the quick takeaway from it, and you saw that from Brendan's presentation, is the Bonfire system has the ability to accept the PDF bonds. They're widely available in the marketplace. The industry uses them. Particularly in Canada, that is the adoption has increased dramatically from coast to coast, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, kind of in the time that I have, just briefly kind of give you just a background, just about what's going on in the bond industry, some of the governance that they have in place for e-bonds. Talk to you a little bit about the eBond platform that I've created, and in particular, how do you verify a digital bond? And then just a couple of sort of comments from experience just on how you go ahead and implement the use of the eBond security as part of your procurement process. So with that, so on this particular slide, just kind of starting at the very foundation, really just, are bonds, digital bonds, legal? Now, I'll just cover it off right now. I'm not a lawyer, but there is legislation in place that you are probably familiar with, both in Canada and the United States, that talk about documents being electronically signed. I don't think if you look through any of those pieces of legislation, there's probably not anything that will specifically say bid bonds and performance bonds and things like that are acceptable in terms of being electronically signed. But I think certainly in the Canadian legislation, what you're looking for is that documents under seal have the equivalence of being signed. If they're signed digitally, then they have the equivalence in the paper, the handwritten signatures as well. So kind of moving from that kind of foundation, or that legal foundation, the industry, to their credit, in both Canada and the US, they realized a number of years ago, I mean, in some cases 10 plus years ago, that their business was about to change as people were beginning to adopt different technology in just being widely used in their businesses. They knew that it was going to affect their industry as well. And what they did a long time ago was get together, certainly amongst themselves, and also reaching out to various stakeholders that they were talking to at that time, and put together a set of guidelines or best practices, depending on which country we're talking about, and just cover off the ideas that what is a digital bond, what is not a digital bond. And so what they've done is they've kind of created these publicly available documents that if need be, you can certainly reach out to them, and they're happy to share that information, what their thoughts are, just what goes into making a digital bond. I'll just pause for a second. I did develop mobile bonds. I do follow the industry guidelines and best practices in both countries, but I just make it very clear that none of the associations endorse or approve or have any affiliation with my company. I just wanted to make that as sort of a full disclosure, so that there's no misunderstandings. And if you ask them, that they'll say that people probably should take their own steps to go through their own due diligence with any platform that's offering the digital bonds. And so that's okay. So I'm moving along, just in terms of what the industry has done and what legal is. So on this next slide, I'm really just giving you kind of a quick snapshot, just to kind of give you a cross section of the types of procurement organizations that are using digital bonds. This list is growing in Canada dramatically, just as they adopt the Bonfire platform, and they start using the e-bonds. And I think in the US, that is coming along as well, and will even more so given the pandemic. So just to give you kind of a quick cross section. And then of course, even though while it was busy enough as it was, people were moving to electronic procurement with the pandemic, this has kind of accelerated the need for digital bonds. And particularly the challenge that the bond industry has had is, if you can imagine, people go to the office every day, and they'll have one manual seal for a particular bonding company that gets used by the authorized people in that office. Now, when everybody has to work from home, who's got the manual seal for the bonds? Well, and so there's been a lot of kind of running around and figuring out how they can keep the momentum and servicing of their clients to get those bonds out the door, which obviously helps, kind of keeps the economy functioning. in terms of putting in their tenders for the work that you folks are looking to get done. So it's been an interesting time, probably in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and just in terms of how people have had to kind of rearrange their business to make that work and make sure that the bonds do get in place. In Canada, it's been fine, because I think because of the adoption rate of eBonding, it's been quite quick in terms of people being able to flip the switch, saying, yep, we're going to take some e-bonds now and carry on. In the US, there was there certainly is used in the e-bonds are used, but there's sort of more heavily used was continue to use of the paper bonds. And so what I've done is I've just included just a publicly available document from the General Services Acquisition Office back in April, that because of the pandemic and because of the logistical issues of getting those bonds out the door, they've made it clear that digital bonds or electronically signed bonds are acceptable. So now we know the pandemic should come to an end at some point, but obviously with the second and third waves that are expected, I guess the question is kind of what will the new normal be going forward? And I think there's a real place for using digital bonds that eliminates the concerns of sadly the interaction of people delivering paper to other people. But I think what people will find is there's a real opportunity in terms of how that changes their business, I think in a good way. It makes it a little bit more convenient, and it also it helps the procurement organizations like yourselves streamline your process so that it's digital from end to end, so that it's all contained in one spot. Okay, so I'm just moving along just with the application, and I wasn't intending to show you how it worked or talk too much about it because it's not something that you would use, to be honest. It's designed for the bidders, the contractors, working with their bonding companies and their brokers or intermediaries in the system. What it does is it doesn't replace any existing relationship that a contractor has with their bonding partners. In fact, what we're doing is we're just the platform that allows them to come in, transact, create the digital bond, and then take it away and then upload it into the Bonfire system. So we think of it as a centralized process. So it's not, so everything has to happen inside the application. And it's not that somebody can just simply sign in and actually execute a bond and take it away. We actually built some layers or process on top of the digital signature software that we use, so that customers, that when they sign up, they have to be approved to actually have access to the system. Within their account, certain people will have what we call as admin status that allows them to manage their account, and allows some people to do certain things and allows other people not to. And we track who has signing authority as well. And then sort of moving beyond that, we've got if you have to have a relationship between the parties that are involved in the bond transaction. And the parties that I mean are the actual bonding company that underwrites the bond, the contractor vendor that is the principal on the bond, and then the broker intermediary producer is also involved. And those three parties, they can invite each other to work together, but they all have to accept that they're going to do that before they can even start an actual request or a transaction in our system. The other important element, because we're a centralized process, the bonding companies actually have control over which of their agents or producers can sign on their behalf. So I think that's important, certainly when we're talking with our bonding company customers, they like that features that they know, and we track the audit and the history of when people have signing authority and when they don't. And so there's some control around, what risks get undertaken by the bonding companies. So, like as I said before, those approval points need to be in place before you can actually create the request. And what, in terms of creating that request, is really it's taking PDF bond forms that you've specified in your requirements. The bonding company or the producer will prepare those documents, put them into PDF, and then upload them into our application where it gets processed for digitally signing and sealing. And what we use is a third-party digital signature software that's been in business for well over 20 years and follows all the various regulatory and laws for e-signing. And so we use that service to apply the seals and the signatures, which are really digital certificates, kind of in the tech language, that are embedded inside the PDF file. And once that's done, then it's just downloading the PDF document by the contractor to their computer and then uploading it into the Bonfire system with their tender. So I think, if I know one of the questions that will come up is if a purchasing organization is asking, well, what's the impact to our vendors? How long does it take to get set up? How much does it cost? And the short answer is it doesn't take that long. It takes a few minutes to register in the system. It might take a few extra minutes depending on how many people in their company need to have access. And then the actual transaction process for signing the document on the contractor side is quite minimal, because the producer, the bonding company, will create the request for them, and they're really coming in, signing the document, and then taking it away. On the cost side, we don't we use a pay-as-you-go business model. Other e-bonding companies out there obviously will use different models, but we think that it's just, the contractors really, they just want their bond. So let's not make things complicated, and let's get them in the system, get them their bond signed and sealed, have it take it away, and move on with the request. So our transaction fee is we just charge $10 per request, and that fee actually can be shared between the contractor and the bonding partner. There's even flexibility that they can decide to one party can pay all of it or none of it. So it does have some flexibility in terms of how they structure the fees that are incurred, just according to whatever arrangements that they have. So how are we doing so far, Rachel? Any questions at this point?
You answered a couple of the most pressing ones, the vendor experience and the cost. So
yeah.
That was, you had a sixth sense there. There was an ask just to clarify the difference between the PDF and the eBond. Just if you could spend a second on that.
Well, I think the timing, I'll just flip to the next screen then. So I mean, there is the labels that we use. Is it an eBond? Is it a digital bond? Is it a scanned PDF? What is it? And we tend to choose whatever label kind of fits the conversation. But what we're producing in our system, it is a PDF. It's been digitally signed and sealed by the parties. And as I mentioned before, when we place those digital signatures on the document, we're actually embedding certificate data inside the file. Now, if you're looking at the bid bond on the screen right now, it doesn't really look any different than a bid bond that you would receive in paper. Right? It's the same words, it'll be same the usual job description and parties. The only difference down below is the signatures are just a legible cursive style that our software uses to place the to represent the person signing the document. I think on the other side of the screen, what we do is we include this summary page that goes with every single document. One, it's to indicate that it's a digital bond. But if you look at the bottom of the screen, we've got links. Two of them are for the verification piece, and then the third one is an audit report that you're able to download, and you can see who signed it, when they signed it, their IP address that they signed it from, and some other details that just kind of reinforces or provides the data behind the actual transaction. So I think what I'll do now, Rachel, is I'm just going to show you just the verification piece because I just skipped over it for a second. And what I'm going to do is just, excuse me for a second.
And just so everyone knows, we'll probably go about 5 minutes over today, but I'm definitely cognizant that is not time you anticipated, but you will get a recording either way, and you will get the deck if you have to jump off. So.
Okay, well, and the good news is I'm almost done. Okay, so what I've done is I've opened up a digital bid bond, similar to the one that was on your screen, and I'll just slowly scroll down. And so what I'm doing is just to show you the verification piece of it. And so I'm going to click to verify. It's going to take you to our website. And let me just get to where I need to get to here.
And after that, if you could just speak to Steve as to whether a notary is no longer necessary for the bonds after this.
Okay. Okay. So you'll find as you're talking about digital bonds that there could be different ways to verify the document. What we did was we looked at the guidelines, the best practices of the surety bond industry way back when, and just to understand what is the purpose of the verification. And I think it's quite obvious is that you as the purchasing organization, you want to be confident that the bond that you've received is in fact the bond that was issued, that hasn't been tampered with in any way. And so based on that and that requirement, we worked with our digital signature software company and said, well, here's our challenge. How do we do this? What's the best way we need to do this? And there's a couple options. Like if you want to self-certify, that's one option. But what we decided we thought was better was having a verification process that compares the document that you have to the document that we have. And that way, any chance of it being tampered with is highly unlikely because you have to tamper with both to make it work. And so what I've done is I selected that PDF file by clicking the link. It triggers the opening of our verification screen. I've pressed the verify bond button, and it gives you an online report immediately. And what we're looking for is under this technical verification, it's just this little green message right here saying that the document that you've got matches exactly the document that we have. And that's it. And so if you've got that, you can verify it at any time. We keep the bonds for a number of years. And so it's available to you publicly. There's no cost. It's just you just need to have the bond available, and then you can verify it anytime. To answer the question about whether or not notaries are required, I mean, and the purpose of the notary is just to confirm that the the person that's signing the bond has the authority to do so, and that's in fact the right person, the correct person has signed the document. Probably in the current term, probably will need a notary public. I think that's just become a practice. But over time, the industry may decide it's not necessary. Certainly a question that comes up in Canada is you've got paper forms and it's got a place for a witness. So I still haven't figured out how somebody can witness another person's digitally signing a document from a different computer. And I think my response is the application is the witness, because we can do the verification. I can download this audit report that you'll see in a second here. I've just downloaded it, and it's giving you all the data in terms of who signed it and their IP address, locations, and all that information that's available. So maybe not a precise answer to that question, but I think it's something that will probably evolve over time.
That was great, Steve. We've also had a lot of questions come in, very, very topical ones. You can tell I'm like acknowledging everyone. I'm not going to essentially pose their question to you. I will let the group know, since we are over and we will be ending momentarily. I'm going to put up a poll quickly, just so everybody is aware of that I'm about to take over the screen. There's a poll that Steve would like to hear from yourselves, and I'm launching now. If your org is considering e-bonds, the timing of them. While I leave that up here, as we close out the webinar, I will let everyone know that if I did not pose your question to Steve, he will still get it, and he will still be able to answer you, as well as or your customer success manager. So some of you have posed questions that I've indicated. Your CSM or your customer success manager will reach out to you specifically, because we know this is a topic that can open a can of worms as far as what's next for your teams. And so we're very cognizant of that as far as the follow-up that is necessary. So we're getting quite a few responses in. In about 2 seconds, I'm going to close this.
Yeah. So Rachel, I'll just finish off with this last slide, if you don't mind. 30 seconds. So the digital bonds have kind of taken off. It's taken, actually a number of years before. But just kind of the experience that I've gathered kind of over that time is just when you're looking for the digital bond services, it's, I think the 3 points that I've listed is the software, the digital signature software, is it following the different legal and regulatory standards? Is the service following the bond industry standards? And then just to ensure that there's an appropriate, verification process that you're comfortable with, that you've got some confidence in the documents that you're receiving. On the procurement side, and this is, you'll know better than I will, but certainly kind of seeing it at the last minute, I honestly do get calls at 9:30 in the morning saying, we just need to figure out, we need an e-bond and the tender closes at 1 o'clock. How can we make this happen? And so we do get them to the finish line within a very short period of time. But I think, things that if you're considering to move into e-bonds, I think you probably know just the tender requirements just need to be clear in terms of what a digital bond is, in terms of what you're expecting. And I would recommend just reaching out to the applicable bond industry, and they'll be more than happy to help you with kind of structuring language that's consistent with their best practices and guidelines. I think the communication with your vendors, I've seen cases where some procurement agencies, will take a considerable time to roll out the e-bonding, and sometimes it's, months, years, and I've also seen others that saying, in 2 weeks we're going to e-bonding, and there's usually, it kind of causes a bit of a stir in the local market. But I mean, you'll know your vendors better than I will, and what they, what their knowledge level is. And then, of course, Bonfire support obviously can easily get that implemented for you. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. I greatly appreciate the opportunity, and I will do my best to answer all of your questions. And certainly, if you need to reach out to me, I'm happy to help. I do get calls frequently from various level of procurement agencies just about eBonding, and I'm always happy to discuss it with them.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Steve. We'll definitely probably do even an aggregate frequently asked questions from this webinar. And I will say, I'm going to, apparently this is my title today, the poll queen, but I will run one more just to help us structure the way we follow up with yourselves. But either way, let us know if you want any specific follow-ups for your org. Any question that came in that I couldn't respond to, we will have your customer success manager and or Steve reach out to support yourselves through this time. So we just want to know how to support yourselves next. But I wanted to say again how grateful I am for Steve to join and take his time to share his expertise on this call. It's definitely been a meaty topic. So my realization is, I think for myself and many, that we may have to have you back if you're okay with that, and spend some more time diving into this topic even more granularly. So on that note, oh, is that a yes? Is that a live yes?
Yes, you've got it recorded, I think.
There we go, exactly. There's accountability there. But on that note, I will go ahead now and close the webinar. 10 minutes late, I'm notorious. I'm sorry about that, everyone. But thank you again for attending today. Thank you again for the guests, and we will send follow-ups as well as a recording of the slide deck very soon. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and stay safe and healthy.